Hello, everyone. I am back. I hope you've been enjoying the sessions, the food, the community building, the getting to know one another, the networking. Things look like they're going well so far. I remarked that there have been no efforts at throwing produce at the stage yet. It's still up and standing. There are no protests outside yet. And I think we've pretty much been on time most of the day. And I consider that a great success at 12 o'clock so far. Before we get to our lunch keynote panel discussion, I'm really excited to announce that we have a guest discussant with us this morning, or presenter. Our Chancellor Carol Christ is here with us today. She's the 11th Chancellor. Welcome. Chancellor Carol Christ is the 11th Chancellor of the University of California at Berkeley, a celebrated scholar of Victorian literature. Chancellor Christ is also well known as an advocate of quality, accessible public higher education. She's a proponent of the value of the broad education perspective in terms of the liberal arts and sciences, and certainly a champion for women's issues and diversity on college campuses. Chancellor Christ spent more than 3 decades as a professor and administrator at UC Berkeley before serving as president of Smith College, one of the nation's most distinguished liberal arts colleges. From 2002 to 2013, she served in that role. She returned to Berkeley in January of 2015 to direct the campus's Center for Studies in Higher Education, one of the centers of the Goldman School of Public Policy. And she was appointed interim executive vice chancellor and provost in April 2016, before being named chancellor in March of 2017. Since her return to Berkeley, she's worked to foster community and improve the campus climate for people of all backgrounds, celebrate the institution's longstanding commitment to free speech, strengthen our financial position, address our housing shortages, and develop a real 10-year strategic plan for the campus. It means a great deal to have her here at our inaugural conference to spend time with us. We are so appreciative of her leadership and her time, and we look forward to her remarks. Thank you, Chancellor Christ. Please welcome to the stage.
Good afternoon. I mean, it's so great that the band is heralding this conference. On behalf of the campus community, I want to welcome you to an event that's really extraordinary, given its dedication to exploring and addressing some of the more pressing challenges that our society is trying to confront. There are existential clocks ticking, and the alarms couldn't be ringing louder. Your presence here today, the ideas you're discussing and exploring, your commitment to finding effective ways to advance the greater good are all welcome and reassuring signs that there's cause for hope. While I admit to a certain degree of bias, I believe that there could be no better location for this gathering than here on the Berkeley campus. In general, and under the auspices of the Goldman School of Public Policy's unique blend of expertise, leadership, and innovation. What animates this university, this school, this conference, and Berkeley's extended community of changemakers is our belief in and commitment to individual and institutional agency, the notion that through the discovery, dissemination, and development of knowledge, we can make the world a better place. How fitting, then, to know that this first ever Berkeley Public Policy Annual Conference is far more than conversation. It's a call to action for all the policy doers, researchers, elected officials, and community leaders in philanthropy, nonprofit, business, and government who are sharing their knowledge, networks, and resources to build a more equitable, inclusive, and just society. The GSPP conference arrives in a moment when we need stronger commitments to innovation in problem solving, to creating new safeguards for democracy, clean water, just systems and policies, and trusted institutions. I'm certain that this convening will help rally changemakers from across the policy landscape to harness their power and channel it towards achieving collective impact in key issue areas. This conference is, of course, just one of the ways that GSPP is seeking to be a greater resource for the public good. By bringing together the rich intellectual and experiential assets of the campus to support, inform, and engage those who most care about change. This is what great public research universities like Berkeley were built for: challenges and opportunities that demand comprehensive excellence, endeavors that require multi- and cross-disciplinary capacity and competence, and a community of teachers, learners, and leaders who have an insatiable desire and an unequaled capacity to advance the greater good. Small but mighty, the GSPP is one of the treasured jewels in Berkeley's crown. I get a vicarious thrill in anticipation of the conversations and collaborations that will take place through the day and beyond. Thank you, and Fiat Lux, and I guess because of the band is out there, go Bears.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Chancellor Christ. It's such an honor to have you with us. And now I am so happy to introduce our lunch keynote panel, Funding, Translating, and Implementing, a Conversation with Foundation Presidents. First, we have our moderator, Angela Glover Blackwell. Angela is founder in residence at PolicyLink. PolicyLink is the organization Angela started in 1999 to advance racial and economic equity for all. Under her leadership, PolicyLink gained national prominence in the movement to use public policy to improve access and opportunity for all low-income people and communities of color, particularly in the areas of health, housing, transportation, and infrastructure. Angela is also a professor of practice here at the Goldman School of Public Policy, the host of the Radical Imagination podcast, and the author of multiple books and publications. Prior to founding PolicyLink, Angela gained national recognition as founder of the Urban Strategies Council and then went on to serve as senior vice president at the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm proud to share that Angela is a Cal alum. She completed her JD at the UC Berkeley School of Law. Next, we have Cathy Cha, president and CEO of the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund. Under her leadership, the San Francisco-based Family Foundation is investing in grassroots organizing, movement building, and policy advocacy to advance equality and justice for immigrants, communities of color, and young people in the Bay Area and across California. Cathy has co-founded and led a variety of groundbreaking partnerships, including the California Campus Catalyst Fund, a funder collaborative that sparked a statewide effort to expand legal and other supports for undocumented students attending California's public colleges and universities. The California Black Freedom Fund, a 5-year initiative that has raised $63 million to date in support of Black-led power building, and Activate California, a partnership to organize Gen Y and Gen Z Asian American Pacific Islanders to become active leaders in civic life. And you might sense a pattern here. Cathy is also a Cal alum with a master's degree in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley. And we are so honored to also have Fred Blackwell. Fred is the CEO of the San Francisco Foundation, one of the largest community foundations in the country. The San Francisco Foundation works hand in hand with donors, community leaders, and both public and private partners to create thriving communities throughout the Bay Area. Since joining the foundation in 2014, Fred has led it in a renewed commitment to social justice through an equity agenda focused on racial and economic inclusion. Prior to joining the foundation, he served as interim city administrator in the city of Oakland. And Fred serves on the Dean's Advisory Council for UC Berkeley's College of Environmental Design. And he is a visiting professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning here at Berkeley. And Fred also received his master's degree in city planning from UC Berkeley. Go Bears! Thank you so much for being here with us. And Angela, please take it away.
It is such a pleasure to be here in this conversation, in this place with you too. I'm just thrilled, and great time to be having this conversation because we are in a time of extraordinary change. Things are going to change from where they are now to something different, and whether or not that different is something that we're going to feel good about depends on what we do during this moment. It's clear that the shifting demographics in the nation, the changing power structure that we're finding in communities, the demands that are really coming to a head as we're getting pushback from the change that seemed to be galloping along for a moment, that this is going to require that all leaders are very deliberate as they try to exercise their leadership for change and focus on the structural change that's going to be needed. Real change happens when you have people who are demanding it. Real change happens when communities become powerful and lean into their power. The quality of that change is dependent on the information that people have. It's dependent on the resources that are available for innovation. It's dependent on aligning policy with the aspirations of people. And I think that all of that really says that when we're in a moment of change, we need to be thinking about root causes of inequity and inequality. The root causes inform us in a way that allows us not to nibble around the edges, but to get right at what needs to change. And so I wanted to start off asking you about root causes, because I know you very well, one of you. I know you both well. And as I have followed your leadership, what I love about it is the way that you are leaning into the moment and bringing your institutions with you. How has the notion of understanding and returning to root causes influenced you? Sorry.
Yeah, so first of all, great to be here. I see a bunch of friends and colleagues in the audience. That always puts a little bit more pressure on you. But it's really good to be on campus and be talking about this. I think I would raise a couple of points in relationship to root causes and how it impacts kind of how I think about the work and actually do the work at the foundation specifically and just more broadly in general. The first, and we've talked about this before, is I kind of came of age professionally at an interesting time, a time when there weren't the kinds of movements to join that really were pushing on kind of systemic change. And it was after the kind of Black Power movement. It was after the Civil Rights movement. And so I kind of came of age in a time when kind of the currency around systems change and policy revolved more around my ability to write good memos and do good PowerPoints and analyze data and really have a cerebral, more professionalized, I would call it, approach to change. And what I have realized is the limitations of that when you're talking about root causes, because root causes and addressing root causes compels you to have all of what I just described, but it also calls on a bit of emotion and anger to combine with that cerebral kind of professionalism in order to make change. So the first thing that I would say is that it really kind of calls on me, at least, to bring a little bit of the frustration and anger that is associated with really understanding root causes to the conversation. The second thing that I think is really important about and how understanding root causes and how it impacts the work is it's an expectation management tool. And what I mean by that is when you look at the scope and scale and complexity of poor policies and poor decision making that have led to the kinds of things that we're now trying to unravel, it should take you to a place where you have a sense of urgency, but also understand the long-term nature of the battle that you are engaged in. And so the expectations and managing the expectations around quick wins, I think is an important part of understanding root causes. Because when you understand root causes, you understand that there are no shortcuts. And when there are no shortcuts, it leads me to the third point, which is understanding root causes makes you understand who you need to be engaging and how they need to be engaged. When you get beyond the quick fix and the quick wins and understand that it's a long game, it makes you deepen the relationships that you are engaged in for the cause so that those relationships can be durable and long-lasting for the work that you are engaged in. I can go on, but I'll let Cathy jump in here, but those are just a few of the things that I think are implications associated with understanding root causes.
Before we go to Cathy, you said one thing about anger and emotion. You talked about the helpfulness of expectations and being able to see who you need to partner with. But where does the emotion and the anger get you?
So, you can have the best ideas that you want from a policy point of view. But those ideas will not turn into change at the scale that's needed, with the level of sustainability that's needed, and with the effectiveness that's needed if it is not connected to a constituency of people who are demanding change. It is not enough just to be right. You got to be right, and you got to be connected to a group of folks who are demanding that the right thing be done. And that can occur without a little anger and emotion, but it rarely does.
And my experience is the authenticity that you need to engage in community demands that you bring some of that.
That is right. That's right. And I would just say one thing. I talked about my career. I spent a lot of my career suppressing my anger and emotion because I felt that it had no currency. And that as a Black man, particularly, showing up angry and emotional would guarantee that I wouldn't be heard. And so it has taken a long time, frankly, and it has taken the energy, the enthusiasm, and the anger of young people to actually clear the way for me to have some emotional currency when it comes to the work.
Thank you.
So Fred and I were in Worcester Hall together. Can you believe this? 30 years ago. And we were clamoring.
I can't believe you just said that.
I know. Can you believe that? And we were clamoring for classes on race and on justice. And we were some of the students that were itching to make a difference. And as I was walking up here, I think that's the beauty of Cal. I feel a little blue and gold love in thinking about Cal as a place that still and always wants to make a difference and change the world. And I think it's a great time to be in the change the world business. And as I was walking up here, I was thinking about two things that, man, if I had known that 30 years ago, who knows what I'd be doing right now. The first thing is this root cause issue, and just everything that we are facing as a society, every challenge, every ill, every problem is racialized. So who dies from COVID more? Where are infant mortality rates the highest? Who's most unprepared for kindergarten? Who's coming to the border seeking a better life? Everything is racialized. And if I had known 30 years ago, as simply, if I had heard that podcast or something, our country, our society's operating system is based on structural racism. And as soon as you understand that root cause, it makes sense to you why there are more laws to restrict voting, why, history is being rewritten about slavery, why the border has become so militarized, on and on and on. The second thing I would say, had I known earlier in my career, is just straight up, we are in this profound moment of a cultural war. A culture war. A culture war of some whites that really long for a more romantic, happy days type of life, want to go back to a country that's very familiar, where everybody else assimilates according to white culture. And I say romanticized because that never really worked for the rest of us. It was kind of hold harmless at best or create massive harm at worst. And that is juxtaposed by the demographic changes that we're seeing here in California and across the country, and the possibilities for a more equitable, a more diverse, a more inclusive tomorrow. And so we're at this crossroads in this country, and all of us will play a part in how this moves forward. And for me, what's exciting is being here in California. I feel like we have an incredible opportunity to show the country what a multicultural democracy looks like, what inclusion looks like, what justice looks like, what equity looks like. And we have to show, I feel an incredible urgency to show the country that it's a happy ending, and that it's a hopeful, happy ending. And I really believe that California can show the way, just like we've done in so many other things, but the moment is now.
Please.
Cathy just said something that I think is really important in terms of the implications of understanding root causes as well, which is if the policies and the systems that have created the kind of injustice and discrimination and the poor outcomes that we have seen are the results of structural racism, then you cannot unravel it without centering race. And I think that's probably the punchline to all this. To think that we can unravel and address outcomes that have been produced by racial undertones and sometimes overtones, we cannot kind of take a race-neutral approach to fixing it, which has implications for, again, who you engage, the data you collect, who gets centered, who the primary audiences are, who is engaged in decision-making, the list goes on.
I was going to ask Cathy about that, it's because she did raise it head on, and you have put your finger right on it. One of the things two things come to mind. You mentioned one of them. You both mentioned them. You mentioned history, Cathy, and you mentioned data, Fred. And those are both so important, and they are really hard. We all know that we're in the middle of a battle around history. But I'd love, Cathy, for you to say a little bit more about how we go beyond shaking our heads at the nightly news to do something about the fact that we have to put the history forward. And for you, Fred, how do we get all of the disciplines to disaggregate the data by race? I read an article in the New York, I think it was the New York Times, about Bank of America last week, came out with a study where they used the credit data that they had available to them, and what they found was a wealth generation gap from just looking at credit. And there was no mention of race in the article. I downloaded the study. It was only 9 pages, luckily, and there was no mention of race in the study. And I thought, well, there's something here, but you're certainly not going to get it if you don't disaggregate by race. So I'd love you both to just dig a little more about what do we do about that?
I'll start on the data piece. And unfortunately, I don't have a silver bullet to it, but I will say that there, I think, are a few components. One is, and I think it's appropriate for us to be talking about data in the policy school, because one component of this is to make this notion of disaggregating data when you are doing this analysis is part of like the best practice and the best approach to doing the work and teaching it in the classroom. You know, I would argue that it should be statistical malpractice when you are not bringing that level of data into the room when you are the data person coming into the room. You need to be bringing that with you. And that needs to be your job. You need to see that as part of your job. I think the second piece is those of us who are who have influence, who are in those rooms, who are using the data, need to demand the data disaggregated when it's not there. And that includes folks who are doing the research and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a second piece. Those are the first two things that come to mind for me, but they don't feel like a silver bullet. Those feel like incremental but important approaches.
And I don't think we have silver bullets. This is a everything, everywhere, all at once strategy to eradicate racism and structural racism from our society. And the reason why I say it like that is we need everything. But one new thing that I will bring to the conversation about history is part of the culture war that we are facing is people are trying to pit Fred and I against each other and our communities against each other. People are pitting Latinos and Blacks against each other, Latinos and AAPIs and Native American, Indigenous. And we have to be smart enough to see what that play looks like and see that divide and conquer is very effective because we feel scarcity all around us, right? I just trying to sign my daughter up for swim classes, and even that is scarcity in the Bay Area, right? Everything is housing, that parking spot, everything is. And so, but we have to see what's going on. And so I don't know exactly, no silver bullets, but there is something about us moving forward together. And I often say in front of AAPI audiences, if you want your story to be told right, you got to get together with Blacks, Latinos, Indigenous communities, and have everybody's story be told correctly. We can't do what just happened in Florida is one community gets their story in a certain way and another community doesn't. And it is up to us to see through that and to figure out a different way forward.
There's one thing on this that I need to bring up because I think, Cathy, you are so right. And I'm about to draw a kind of generational dividing line with this comment. There was this commercial. You'll remember it. I remember it. There'll be some folks who will not know what I'm talking about. Vidal Sassoon that said, "You don't look good if we don't look good." That concept is, I think, applicable to what Cathy is talking about. One community's gain is not another community's setback, and we don't all win until each of us individually wins.
Well, that is certainly true. That is certainly true. And I think that when you talk about centering race, you're getting right at that. Now, I'm going to return to that if we have time, because there's a lot to say there. But I don't want to leave the data conversation without talking about the wisdom, because part of the data that we need is the wisdom that comes from people who are living the experiences that we are often so worried about. When I started PolicyLink 25 years ago, it was to build on the wisdom, voice, and experience of people who are working and need change in their local communities. And so much of policy happens just looking at numbers or just looking at research that wasn't disaggregated by race, without actually talking to the people who know the most. The wisdom that comes from community, the wisdom that comes from people who are living it every day, and I want to add, the wisdom that comes with those people who are working effectively for change in their local communities, organizing, building power, providing resources, running for office, right there on the ground. That is the wisdom that we need. How are you approaching this issue of wisdom, and why is that wisdom so important to develop the kind of strategies that we need to go forward?
You know, I want to help make the case for why community participation is important. And I know some of you all are going to go into government. And too often, government sees community participation as a box to check off in the process, or a must do, or a burden even to just plow through. And I want to tell you, if I was the CEO of an airline and our bags were constantly late or lost, I would want to go down to the baggage handlers and ask them, what's going on? Do you have any ideas of what the problem is? And do you have any ideas to make this better, right? And so this is just smart business. And so there's part of it that's about inclusion and equity and doing the right thing to engage community folks. But part of it for me is really about efficacy. And I'm going to tell you a short story. It's a Cal related. I tried to think of Cal stories on the way over here, just because we're here. But so when President Obama was faced with immigration reform, came to San Francisco and did a big, well-publicized talk about immigration at an elementary school. And I was in the audience, 200 people there. And as he was speaking, a young man named Ju Hong spoke up, interrupted him, and said, "President, you have the power to keep families together and to stop the deportations. You have the power." Ju Hong, and the reason why I mention him, he is a Cal alum now, and undocumented, and he was the first member of the what's the Senate here? Thank you, ASUC Senate, who was undocumented. And he spoke out to the president, and honestly, I thought he was gonna be in detention or deported. It was so courageous for him to do that with the cameras and the Secret Service folks milling around him. But because President Obama is a cool president, the president said, no, let the young man talk. And they actually had an exchange for a moment. And the president said, "This is the job of Congress. I don't make immigration laws. This is the job of Congress. You're turning your fire at the wrong place." And Ju kept going. Fast forward about 8 months later, the president created DACA and took the route of administrative relief. Just like undocumented young people, Nettie Dominguez, Ju Hong, others demanded. And I will tell you, as one of the professionals that were part of the immigration movement, they really bucked a trend. Everybody was focused on a legislative, congressional approach. And it was the young dreamers themselves that demanded immediate relief. That was 11 years ago, and the legislative path has been stuck ever since then. DACA is threatened, but we got DACA. And I lift up that story, and I want to give you 3 takeaways from that story about community participation. Number 1, instead of a drudgery or a must-do, community engagement can potentially be another source for innovation, for new ideas, for policies. Again, people who are closest to the problems are closest to the solution. You can be inspired with a new idea. That's the first thing. Second thing I would say, there's a fierce urgency of now that community people bring to anything. So you got your report coming out and you're like, that would be a lot of work to get it out by the end of the month. Let's just delay it. Community folks never say that because this is about their lives, their families' lives that are on the line. So the fierce urgency that we all need in our bureaucracies, in our nonprofits, in our foundations, in our higher ed, community folks bring that. The last thing that I would say is they bring a level of tenaciousness and determination that keeps us all focused and moving forward. So I just want to lift up the story of Ju Hong because he is a leader that was from this campus, and I just appreciate the possibilities that community folks can bring to our debates.
You're good.
She said it all. Maybe I'll add a couple of things and then to tell you a little bit of a story about San Francisco Foundation and how we've been approaching this and how the data and the wisdom has been important. You know, when folks generally think about data, and you kind of alluded to this, we think about census data sets, we think about administrative data, things like child welfare, children's mental health, the crime data, and that kind of stuff. And that stuff is important. It's important to disaggregate by race. But what analyzing that data does is it shows you where the problems are and who needs to be targeted. But it doesn't tell you much about solutions. Doesn't tell you much about solutions. And we found that at the San Francisco Foundation. When I got there and we kind of started to reorganize ourselves around this North Star, around racial equity and economic inclusion, we looked at the data to understand where geographically we needed to focus, what communities we needed, the populations we needed to focus on, which issue areas were impacting the Bay Area the most. But it didn't tell us anything about how we should organize ourselves and what the strategies needed to be. And what we did was we took the data and we went back out to the community and we asked a simple question that brought out some very complex answers, which was we presented the data to them and then we asked, how did we get here? And when we asked community members, how did we get here? And folks started to talk about root causes. And they started to talk about the policy and land use decisions that were made and the use of eminent domain in their communities and the businesses and commercial corridors that used to be thriving but no longer are because of policy decisions that were made. Then it started to become clear what the strategies needed to be. And so you are absolutely right. We have to combine with the quantitative that we get from these administrative data sets and things like the census with the qualitative data that only comes from the wisdom and experience of the communities that are impacted by the decisions that we are making. And so that is really right on. The other thing I would say about wisdom and policy is this. You know, I've been at the foundation and in philanthropy for a while, but everything I learned about policy making, I learned in the belly of the beast. I was the deputy director and director of the mayor's office of community development in San Francisco. I was the head of the redevelopment agency in San Francisco. I was the assistant city administrator in Oakland for a long time, working with a bunch of people in this room. And I got to tell you, there's nothing like having an oversight responsibility for all the things people complain about in the communities you grew up in. And so all of that and policymaking in that environment is what kind of told me how this works. And Cathy is absolutely right. It is possible to bring the wisdom of community into the policymaking process within government, but the system is not set up to do that. It is not structurally set up to do that. It is structurally set up in a way where an issue will come up. You may have a policymaker who has the right sensibilities to engage community a little bit in kind of identifying what the legislative agenda might be in a year. But then staff goes into the lab, they do some good work, then it comes out of the lab and gets introduced at a city council meeting months or a supervisor meeting months down the line, and then the battle lines are drawn on one side of the policy or the other side of the policy, and there is actually very little public discussion or incubation of the ideas. And so we've got to change the structure in a system that actually brings the wisdom in at the front end and has community in a co-design process rather than set up as one part of the community pitted against another part of the community to fight over the nuances of, you know, this whereas and this therefore.
I got one follow-up on that because, you know, there are a lot of people in the audience who are out there in government. They're already, they have alumni here. That's right. And so I just want you both to think about this a little bit because your instincts are so right. that you have to do more than just have a focus group, have a few people come in, check the box. It's got to be at every level, understanding the problem, developing good practice, policy that goes good practice, and then implementation. How do you make sure that when you bring in community, you go beyond the usual suspects without leaving out the usual suspects, which too often happens? Sometimes people say we don't want the usual suspects, and you go get a few community people who haven't got the history, haven't got the constituency, and nothing can happen. Or you only bring in the people who are always there and not going beyond them to understand. This is so important.
You want, and this is where philanthropy comes in.
Okay.
This is, and this is what I mean. I'm going to get there. You know, the one thing that in this country over the last two administrations that Republicans and Democrats have agreed on, maybe not, there may be more than one, but this is one that's been very visible, is infrastructure. The need to invest in our bridges, our sidewalks, our streets, our parks, our libraries. There's been agreement on that. And, you know, there are now huge investments in the physical infrastructure around this country, in cities, rural areas, and communities, because folks understand the deferred maintenance that has been associated with that infrastructure and how important that infrastructure is for cities and counties and regions to operate effectively and thrive. I would argue that in order for us to have high-functioning democracies, high-functioning cities that thrive, communities that thrive, regions that thrive, we need to also have a similar amount of investment in civic infrastructure. And that the erosion and the lack of investment in our civic infrastructure is what is leading to the amount of division that we see and the inability of communities to come together across unusual lines to identify problems and solve them. And that civic infrastructure is the kind of civic infrastructure that can be utilized to deliver the kind of systems that I'm talking about that can deliver good policy and good systems change. And that civic infrastructure involves philanthropy, it involves local media, it involves the trade associations, it involves the community groups, the neighborhood associations, and it is philanthropy that has the capability to have the long-term view to invest in that civic infrastructure so that it is meaningful and can be a partner to policymakers to make the kinds of policies that we need, to bring the right data to the table, to set the tables for real conversations across the usual and the unusual suspects, and bring evidence around what works to the table so that we aren't continuing to go down rabbit holes of investing in things that we know don't work. And so all of that civic infrastructure, I think, is fundamental to achieving what we're trying to achieve. And I think that it is experiencing the same level of deferred maintenance that the physical infrastructure has experienced.
Cathy, you want
You know, Fred's spot on this. And the only thing I would add is underscoring something Fred said, which is earlier, for all of you in the public sector, too often the community engagement is at the very end. Decisions have really been made. It's just the last sign off. And I think there's a more generative earlier phase, a co-design phase that could be really powerful. And again, I think all of us, if we could be more creative instead of seeing this as a burden, but seeing this as an opportunity or one of the many things in our toolkits for innovative new ideas, we'd move earlier and we'd be more creative. The second thing I'd say just about the philanthropy and nonprofit side, we don't often talk about our work this way. You know, in my office, we talk about power building or organizing, but in truth, we are setting up the civic structures for undocumented young people so that they have a collective voice and a political home and an organizing space, for home care workers in California, for day laborers, for farm workers.
And so this is not necessarily all going to happen in government, but it is those nonprofit partners that are out there and how to work with them differently to use their existing structures, faith and church groups, et cetera, for earlier input.
Great. I just want to talk about radical imagination for a bit. I have a podcast called Radical Imagination, and the reason I have it is because I believe that we're at a point where we are asking our systems, our agencies, all of society to do something that not only has never been done, but none of the institutions and systems that we have were designed to do it. As a matter of fact, most of them were designed not to do it. So that we have all these systems that have no orientation toward building a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So we got to bring our radical imagination to push us to go beyond just tinkering or reforming or making little changes in systems that are not going to get us where we need to get to in a shorter period of time than we think we have. Because the change, the demand for it is coming fast. And so I'm wondering, where have you seen radical imagination operating? Where have you seen partnerships between policy and philanthropy and practice? One that I think of, the first year of the podcast, we did Mayor Tubbs, and talked about guaranteed income. And that's certainly an example of philanthropy and community all coming together. But what are you seeing out there? Cathy, start with you.
I'll throw out another example that involves Cal. So immigrant communities across the state about 10 years ago were facing DUI checkpoints all over, suburban, urban areas. And they weren't DUI checkpoints on Friday nights in the bar or downtown areas. They were DUI checkpoints an hour before Mass started in Latino communities. And communities were noticing this and saying, hey, what is going on here? So folks at the law school, researchers, actually looked into DUI checkpoints across the state, did a survey, did monitoring, got data. And what they found was, yes, indeed, it was daytime, it was particularly targeted to Latino communities, et cetera. And fast forward, what happened was they used that data very smartly with media and shaped a narrative about this isn't good government, this isn't improving our public safety, this actually isn't even dealing with safe roads and intoxicated drivers, this is profiling. And moving forward, what they ended up doing was, this was one of California's first steps towards separating ICE from police and not having police acting as de facto immigration officers. And then the innovations kept coming. They said, if there's ever a Muslim ban, California's never going to be part of it, et cetera. And many of these policy ideas, these legislative wins, got taken to all sorts of different parts of the country, Iowa and places that aren't just the blue states. And so I lift that up because it was an example of researchers, community issues floating up, researchers getting a handle of it, and I really need to add narrative, especially since Haas Jr. does so much work around shaping a narrative. It is hard to get a new idea forward if you're not working off of your own narrative about how the world works. And so narrative is another component I would add to the mix. And then there was just good old-fashioned grassroots power and organizing, not just in San Francisco and Oakland and in LA, but really in different parts of the Central Valley, in the Inland Empire, in the Central Coast. Rural and urban came together, coastal and inland. Many generations of immigrants came together to stop all of this profiling that was happening. And so I just lift up that example because I think there are different sectors that are coming together. And then the last thing I'd say about philanthropy is we are often we never have enough money. The public money eclipses us over and over again, but we have fast money that can be very valuable to test a new idea and to iterate and for R&D. And so if we can do proof of concept and support that, oftentimes that, just like democracy dollars in Oakland, which is something the Haas Junior Fund has been supporting, an innovation like that could take off more broadly. Fred?
Yeah, I can think of a few examples.
We have about 3 minutes.
All right, okay, well, I'll only do a couple of it. One is I think there's a lot of radical imagination going on in the field of reimagining public safety. I think that there are just a ton of examples of communities that are coming up with innovative, creative, and effective ideas and programs and policy strategies to reimagining what it looks like to have safety in their communities. And I think that that is an area that is just like percolating with radical imagination.
Started with community.
Starting with community, exactly. Another area is around the decriminalization of poverty. There are just all these things that we do to burden folks who are low income with additional fines, fees, tariffs, you name it, that prevent them from getting ahead. And I think that there's a lot of innovative stuff that's going on right now to unpack that, better understand it, and wipe it clean so that folks who have the least ability to pay for these kinds of things aren't burdened with having to do that. That's another area. But the last thing I wanted to mention was that the public dollars dwarf the philanthropic dollars when it comes to innovation and imagination and being able to do these things. And private capital dwarfs the public dollar. And there are very interesting things that are starting to happen with capital and private equities that are starting to happen because more people of color, more women are getting engaged in that field and putting together funds and supporting innovative things that do good and do well. An example, there's a woman named Cathy Cha, who runs a fund called Impact America, which is about making private investments that really make a good return, but are in companies that are solving problems in urban areas. And one of the companies that's in her portfolio is a company called Maven. And what Maven does is it works with women who are hairdressers to allow them to be able to make money when they are doing weaves and other hair kinds of things. This is an amazing thing because what generally happens is that if you want to get your weave done, you go to the beauty store, or you go online and you buy your hair, and then you bring it into the salon to get the hair done. This allows the women who are doing the hair to make money off the sale of the hair. And these kinds of things are starting to happen and be invested in at scale in private markets. And so I just wanted to end with a plug for not just kind of philanthropy and nonprofits and the public sector to be engaged in radical imagination, but let's sweep in the private sector. In philanthropy, we most of the time are only spending 5% of the money a year. We've got 95% of our money sitting and invested in public equities and private equities. What if we were to start investing our endowments in these kinds of innovations?
Fabulous stuff. Now I want to come back and spend about 2 minutes talking about centering race. I didn't want to go there when you brought it up because I thought that we might stay there for the rest of the conversation, and I want to bring the rest of this in. But it is so important. And when I talk about centering race, I have started to talk about it in a way that really disaggregates race. So that when we talk about centering race, it is so important to understand that the contours of white supremacy actually developed around what was being done to indigenous people in terms of genocide and erasure of culture and stealing land. and that the protocols of oppression in many ways grow out of the black-white paradigm, that so much of what has happened to make sure that institutions would not serve black people, so that minimum wage, labor protections, minimum wage, eliminating maids and agricultural workers, all of these kinds of things that have happened in so many institutions to make sure that black people were penalized, or to be more specific, that their labor was available to benefit others. Those things now just permeate throughout society, those protocols of oppression growing out of the black-white paradigm. So I want to turn to you to talk a little bit about how we're able to create conversations that allow for this to be able to inform so many people who don't disaggregate the history in a way that allows us to apply it.
I mean, you gave the answer on that one.
+1, Angela, mic drop.
Anything that you want to add or nuance? Because I don't think that what I've said, let me put it this way, I never feel I have enough time to say it, because there's so much to push back on. There's so much to push back on from people often who are white and don't want to have the conversation like that. Push back from people who are Asian and Latinx and want to know, where do I fit in that? There's so much of that that happens that you never really have enough time to be able to show that the attempt to center race is an attempt to get at root causes in a way that can allow us to all see ourselves in the way that race is unfolded in this country. And that when we all see ourselves, that can then take us to another thing I like to talk about, which is transformative solidarity, that allows us to come together not in a transactional way, but in a way in which we all have a stake in making sure that we build an equitable society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential.
Let me tuck something in, and Angela, we could just listen to you all afternoon, and my mind is racing, but my heart is inspired by your words. You know, I just, as we all fit in when we center race, is the point that I want to make. You know, anti-blackness is the bedrock of racism in this country. And for the rest of us, other communities, the faster we can see that and the faster we can work on anti-blackness in our own communities and change hearts and minds and move forward in a different direction, the whole country's going to move forward, the whole state's going to move forward. So again, this isn't us versus them. This is about, where do we start? How do we create that big tent? And how do we all move forward together?
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm right, but I have a point of view on this. And that is that I think that it is difficult for specific racial and ethnic communities to see the whole, and why it's important to have solidarity when their specific racial and ethnic communities are resource-starved and hurting themselves. And so I think that we have to do two things simultaneously. I think that we have to invest deeply in specific communities, Latinx communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities, AAPI communities, poor white communities. And we have to build the kind of movement that gets each of those individual groups to understand, as I said before, that they don't win until we all win. Those things have to be happening simultaneously. We can't ask folks to have empathy for another community when they are starving. We've gotta, there's gotta be a certain kind of care and feeding of these individual communities while we are moving people to solidarity.
I agree. And let me just thank you for an extraordinary conversation and say that listening to you certainly gives me hope. And when I think about hope, I always think about the words of Miriam Kaba that abolitionist. You know, she's prison abolition, but she's an abolitionist to her soul. And she says that hope is a discipline. And when I first heard that, I thought, well, yes, of course, that's true. That it takes discipline to get up every day and to believe that we can build something better in light of all the pushback and the disappointments. But there also is the discipline of hope. And the discipline of hope requires having the information, building the partnerships, having a vision for where it is you want to go, aligning all of that, finding the transformative solidarity to be able to meet the demands. So I think that you all practice hope in that way, and you give us hope. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much. And no, but I'm just going to bring us back. My name is Hillary Hoynes. I'm a professor at the Goldman School and associate dean. And I just want to ask for another round of applause for this incredible panel. Thank you to Angela, Fred, Cathy for leading us through this engaging, humorous, mic drop conversation. So thank you very much. And thank you to the Chancellor for joining us today. And what I want to let you all know is that the buffet is still out there. If you're feeling a bit peckish, it's going to be open until 1:30, and sessions start right up again here and at the Residence Inn at 1:45. And I want you all to enjoy the rest of the afternoon. We will convene back in here for dinner and a very exciting program with some special guests that starts at 5:15. So thank you again very much, and thanks again to our panel.